Hi, so tonight we're going to talk about medieval times, dinner, and tournament. Trust me, these folks had some seriously bizarre ideas about proper entertainment and dining etiquette that'll make your most awkward modern dinner parties seem tame. Oh, and if you're enjoying these sleepy history rambles, I'd really appreciate a like or a subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are nodding off to this all over the world. Alright, let's step back into the smoke and fire of the Middle Ages and prepare for a night of roasted meats, clashing steel, and questionable table manners. The sun had not yet fully dipped below the horizon when the first trumpets called out from the wooden towers flanking the gates of the tournament grounds. Though dusk painted the sky in lazy streaks of apricot and plum, the fading light only added to the enchantment of the spectacle. This was no ordinary evening in the countryside. This was an affair of pageantry, of spectacle, of theater, cloaked in armor and crowned in roast pheasant. The medieval times, dinner, and tournament, though known by different names and traditions in different lands, was a grand occasion of the age, where revelry and rivalry dined hand in hand beneath rafters heavy with smoke. The road leading up to the tournament grounds bustled with carriages, ox carts, and clusters of wide-eyed peasants trudging beside their lords and mistresses. Merchants called out from behind tables of ribbon and carved trinkets, offering favors and keepsakes to commemorate the evening. Ale sloshed from wooden mugs, children darted between legs, and somewhere a one-eyed minstrel plucked a thin tune on a harp strung with horsehair. The gathering hall, if one could call it that, resembled more barn than palace. Hewn timber and stonework formed the walls, banners of every imaginable hue drooping from crossbeams, some embroidered with roaring lions, others with wolves, serpents, or hawks. Long tables stretched from end to end, littered with trenchers and goblets, with chickens turning lazily on spits nearby. At the center of the arena, a pit of packed earth and scattered hay, a raised dais stood like a stage. Here the knights would joust, fight, and posture beneath torchlight and audience cheer. But all that was to come. First, the guests must take their seats. As a visitor, you might be directed to the Yellow Knight's table, or to the domain of the Green Falcon, or the Crimson Griffin. Each table cheered its champion with alarming fervor, waving embroidered cloths or blowing brass horns passed down generations. It was not unheard of for a noble lady to faint from excitement during the final round, or for a drunken merchant to declare his allegiance by throwing a whole turnip at the enemy knight. Dinner was no refined affair. It began with flagons of mulled wine or mead, sweet and spiced, often poured freely. The servants, young boys and old men alike, dressed in livery that hadn't seen soap since the last harvest moon, shuffled between the benches, balancing trays of food that made up for in abundance what they lacked in grace. No forks, of course. One was expected to eat with one's fingers, and perhaps a dull knife for slicing. Stewed lentils, whole fowl, pork in mustard sauce, and crusty bread filled the trenchers carved from stale loaves. The aroma was thick: smoke, grease, sweat, rosemary, and scorched meat. Table talk was loud, occasionally obscene, and almost always accompanied by an impromptu bard's ballad or a nearby peasant couple arguing in hushed tones. But then the torches were dimmed, the horn sounded once more, and silence fell like a thick woolen blanket. From a narrow gate beneath the banners, the knights emerged. Clad in chainmail and brightly painted surcoats, each rider guided a horse dressed in caparison to match their colors. They carried lances tall as flagpoles and shields emblazoned with mythic beasts. Their names were called one by one: Sir Cedric of the Vine, Sir Alaric of the Hollow Glen, Sir Brant of the Eastern Marches. The crowd roared. Tankards were lifted. Children stood on benches. And somewhere, beneath all the bravado and the ceremonial pomp, someone reached for another slice of greasy roast fowl, not caring whether the Red Knight won or lost, but just hoping there'd be pie for dessert. Thus the night began, not with decorum, but with delight. Not with ceremony, but with a cheer, a clatter, and a tumble of bread crust onto hay-strewn floors. It was the Middle Ages after all. And tonight, as every night, history would be rewritten in the form of shouting peasants, sputtering torches, and choreographed chaos. And so, if you're lying back now, eyes beginning to blink heavier and heavier, imagine the sounds of hoofbeats and hurrahs fading slowly into the dark. Chapter 2 will begin shortly. But for now, let the music of distant lutes and roasting pork lull you into a medieval kind of slumber. The echo of footsteps grew louder as the guests moved from the dim corridors of the stone entryway and into the main hall, a space so wide and high that it seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. This was the Hall of Flags, the heart of the evening's event, where history and fantasy, chivalry and cheer mingled beneath the wooden beams and wrought iron sconces. It was not a castle in the true medieval sense. There were no drafty stone cells or towering keeps, and yet the mood it conjured was unmistakable. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, charred wood, and something faintly sweet, perhaps mulled cider or baked apples laced with cinnamon. These were smells meant to comfort, to root a soul in the hearth of nostalgia. The ceiling soared above, supported by thick, dark beams stained by time and torch smoke. Suspended from them were colorful banners representing the houses of the competing knights. Each one was stitched with care, decorated with embroidered crests and curling filigree, their edges slightly frayed not from neglect, but from years of proud waving and heavy use. The flags swayed gently, as if breathing. From the rafters hung chandeliers made of blackened iron, their many prongs tipped with beeswax candles. The flames flickered unevenly, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls, where tapestries and shields adorned every available surface. One shield bore a raven on a field of frost, another a golden boar flanked by ivy. There were no two the same, and yet all seemed connected by the quiet thread of medieval memory, as though they had watched over many such evenings in the company of revelers and dreamers. The tables stretched in long rows across the packed earth floor, not quite level, their legs slightly uneven, yet somehow that made it all the more real. The wood was worn smooth from decades of elbows, cups, and heavy plates. Pewter mugs were already set out at each place, along with napkins folded like fleur-de-lis. The cutlery was humble, no forks, only knives and spoons, in keeping with the tradition of eating as they did in the Middle Ages. Benches lined both sides of the tables, built for shoulder-to-shoulder feasting. It was a communal affair, just as it might have been in the banquet halls of centuries past. There were no private booths, no solitary seats here. All guests were united in their anticipation of the show, their hunger, and the low hum of wonder. At the far end of the hall stood the royal box, a raised platform where the king and queen of the evening would sit, their thrones carved from dark oak and cushioned in crimson velvet. Behind them, an enormous banner hung from ceiling to floor, bearing the symbol of the realm, a sunburst behind a crown flanked by falcons. It was meant to anchor the room, a visual compass by which all could orient themselves. And then came the fires. Along the walls, torch brackets held burning brands, their flames flickering in shades of orange, gold, and occasional blue. The fire gave the hall its warmth, not just in temperature, but in tone. It softened the hard edges of the room and painted everything in the rich palette of a dream. The crackling of wood was constant, a gentle percussive rhythm beneath the voices of the guests. The servants appeared like shadows, dressed in tunics and hose, their aprons stained with flour, grease, or spilled drink. They moved quietly, efficiently, some carrying trays of bread, others pitchers of mead or dark ale. There was no rush. The evening would unfold slowly, like the turning of parchment pages in an old book. At the center of the hall stood a large hearth, its fire so wide and tall it could roast an entire boar, and perhaps it had. Above it hung a spit on which chickens turned, their skins browning and blistering, dripping with fragrant juices. A stew pot the size of a barrel bubbled nearby, its surface shimmering with oil and flecks of green herbs. Guests took their seats, some gingerly at first, then with the growing ease of those settling in for a long and pleasant story. Murmurs floated through the room, soft laughter, clinks of mugs, the occasional whispered question from a child to a parent, "Will there be a dragon?" Or, "Is that a real knight?" The servers brought the first course. It was simple fare, a half loaf of brown bread, still warm from the oven, with a side of garlic butter. No need for ceremony here. The bread tore easily, steam rising from its soft middle, filling the air with that unmistakable aroma of yeast and hearth. Alongside it came a tureen of soup thick with lentils and carrots, onions and chunks of ham. No silver spoons, just heavy wooden ladles and bowls large enough to warm both hands. There was something comforting in the simplicity of it all. In an age of fine dining and artificial lighting, here was a place where food was torn, not sliced, where you drank with both hands, and where no one would judge if you wiped your fingers on your tunic. And so the guests ate, slowly, chatting as the hall grew fuller, and the flames burned brighter. The light shifted over time, as if the sun itself were descending through the rafters. Laughter grew louder, drinks were refilled, and time began to bend not backward or forward, but into a gentle spiral of timelessness. In that warm, flickering hall, as the banners waved and the torches hissed, it was easy to forget the present, easy to imagine yourself in a time long past, where kings still ruled by divine right, and knights lived by the code of chivalry, where horses stamped in the stables outside and lutes played softly in the far alcove, where dinner was not a task to complete, but an experience to savor. The feast was only beginning, the show still waiting behind the great gates. But already the Hall of Flags had done its work, wrapping its guests in a warm medieval embrace, easing their minds into a slower rhythm, inviting them to set down their burdens and drift into the enchantment of another age. The light within the great hall dimmed slightly, as though the torches themselves were holding their breath. Then, without warning, a single clear trumpet call rang through the air, a sound so crisp and ceremonial it seemed to carve the silence like a knight's blade through parchment. The herald had arrived. Dressed in a tunic of gold and crimson, stitched with the crest of the realm, a lion rampant bordered by ivy vines, he stood upon the raised dais near the throne. His boots, polished to a sheen, clicked smartly against the stone floor as he took his place, tall and still, a living statue of duty and dignity. He held a scroll long, yellowed, and sealed with wax, the symbol of official proclamation in a courtly world built upon tradition. The crowd in the gallery stirred only slightly, with whispers soft as velvet slipping between the timbers of the great arena. Children paused in their excitement, hushed by the sheer command of that trumpet's echo. Even the clatter of tankards dulled for a moment. And then he spoke. "Oyez, oyez, lords and ladies of the realm," the herald called, his voice ringing out across the sand-strewn tournament floor. "Your noble presence is most humbly welcome to this feast of honor, chivalry, and valor." The cadence of his words was deliberate and slow, the syllables stretched and folded as if they were part of a liturgical chant. He had done this many times, no doubt, but tonight, the words felt ceremonial, sacred even. He unfurled the scroll with a practiced flick of the wrist. The parchment unfurled like a dragon's tail, curling slightly at the ends, its edges marked with soot and age. He read aloud the formal invitation to the tournament, dated in the year of our Lord, written in calligraphy so ornate that even the simplest names resembled royal titles. The proclamation welcomed all subjects of the kingdom, highborn or common, to witness a series of contests in arms, to dine, to cheer, to remember the virtues of honor, courage, and loyalty. The names of the knights were read one by one, slowly and with emphasis, as if each was being knighted anew before the assembled eyes. Sir Cedric of the Glen, Lord Alaric of the Eastern Wind, Sir Rowan the Stalwart, Lady Isolde of the Ivory Spire. The list went on, each name announced to mild applause and murmured curiosity. Every knight carried a story, tales whispered by traveling minstrels and drunken squires, and tonight their legends would be tested beneath the eyes of hundreds and in the glow of flickering torchlight. When the names had been read, the herald paused. He looked up from the scroll, raising his hand. The trumpet sounded again, a rising fanfare this time, and the hall erupted into the solemn pageantry of the opening ceremony. The great portcullis groaned open at the far end of the arena. From the shadows of the corridor beyond emerged the knights in full regalia. Their horses were draped in barding, dyed to match their house colors, rich hues of emerald green, sapphire blue, deep maroon, and golden yellow. Each horse bore the sigil of its rider, emblazoned on both sides, fluttering gently with each proud step. The clopping of hooves echoed like drumbeats. The first knight, Sir Cedric, rode slowly into the arena. His armor was polished to a near blinding shine, his helm adorned with a plume of forest green feathers. He held his lance upright, its tip capped with a ceremonial ribbon. Behind him came the others, in orderly procession. Not fast. Never fast. This was not the gallop of battle. It was the march of pageantry, a reminder of station, discipline, and the quiet confidence of the well-trained. Each knight circled the arena, acknowledging the crowd with a tilt of the head or a raised lance. The people responded with reserved claps and quiet cheers. This was not yet the time for raucous celebration. This was tradition, ritual, a quiet unfolding of a story long written in the annals of knighthood. At the center of the arena, a platform had been placed for the king and queen to observe the ceremony. They now entered as well, accompanied by an entourage of stewards and maids of honor. Their robes trailed behind them like waves of velvet, dusting the stone steps as they ascended to their throne. The queen, radiant in deep burgundy, trimmed with white ermine, lifted a hand delicately as the knights passed. The king, bearded and solemn, nodded with the practiced weariness of one who had seen many tournaments. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence was the final seal. With the royal family seated, the herald raised his voice once more. Let it be known across all corners of the realm, from the misty hills of Dunwold to the shores of the Sea of Graves, that this tournament is hereby begun. The trumpet blared a final flourish, and with that, The knights trotted off to their respective gates to prepare for the coming events. The crowd began to stir again, the quiet formality replaced now with murmurs of anticipation. Children leaned forward. Old men reached for their tankards. Wives whispered wagers to one another behind gloved hands. But for one lingering moment, as the torches danced across the chainmail and painted shields, the arena felt like a cathedral. A sacred place, a timeless place, where pageantry still reigned, where honor still mattered, and where, just for one evening, you could believe in legends again. The long wooden bridge leading to the stone hall echoed gently beneath the wheels of arriving carriages. Lanterns swayed slowly in the cool dusk air, casting golden pools of light onto the gravel paths, where damp footprints and scattered hay marked the trail of earlier arrivals. The world outside the tournament grounds grew dim and misty, and within the high castle walls, a ritual older than memory prepared to unfold. Tonight, the nobles would arrive not in secrecy or solitude, but with the quiet, regal ceremony reserved for those born into names longer than breath and wealth deeper than cellars. Some came clad in furs, stitched with the emblems of swans or lions or gilded swords. Others wore simpler garb, but the tailored cuts, the velvet sleeves, and the jeweled clasps gave them away. These were not people of toil or trade. These were people of land, title, and ancestry. A thin line of servants in green and gold livery stood along the edge of the flagstone entry hall, each holding a small torch. Their heads bowed ever so slightly as the first of the noble guests stepped through the oaken doors. Cloaks were lifted from shoulders, gloves slipped from ringed fingers, and murmured greetings passed softly from mouth to mouth, none too loud, none too warm. In one corner of the hall, a tall steward with thinning gray hair and a ledger bound in calfskin whispered each name to the young page by his side, who scurried forward to announce the guests in delicate Latinized form. Domina Cecilia de Roanford, the boy called softly, as a woman in deep crimson silk swept into the candlelight. Behind her, the procession continued. Nobles arrived alone, in pairs, or flanked by quiet children with eyes like mirrors. The room slowly filled with a hush rather than a clamor, as if the gathering were less of a feast and more of a communion. Each guest was gently guided by footmen into the great hall, a long, echoing chamber with high-arched beams, trestle tables stretching out like wooden rivers, and a fire crackling lazily in the central hearth. The seating ritual, as was custom, did not begin in earnest until the high table was complete. There, at the elevated platform under the heraldic banners of old houses, the lord and lady of the evening would sit not necessarily the rulers of the land, but those deemed highest in favor or lineage. Tonight, it was Lord Marion of Kentmere and his cousin, the Lady Thalia of Penwood, whose family name dated back to some half-forgotten siege. Neither was particularly young, but both had posture like drawn bows, and expressions that moved only by force of will. As they took their places, the guests moved according to rank and memory. There were no place cards, only the slow unfolding of tradition and silent agreement. Those nearest the high table sat in carved chairs with embroidered cushions. Those further down received plain benches, though the wood was still smooth, oiled, and without splinter. To sit at the center was to be seen. To sit at the edges was to observe. None complained. Everyone knew their place. Once seated, servants moved among them like whispers. They poured warm water into pewter basins, offering each guest the chance to wash hands before the meal. This too was ceremony. One did not simply eat, one prepared, one awaited, one existed in the rhythm of the evening. No one used the word entertainment. yet the whole atmosphere was designed for it. Minstrels tuned their lutes near the alcove. A jester in yellow and violet stood silent for now, juggling apples for the watchful eyes of children seated near their tutors. And in the far back of the room, two squires tested a dulled sword's balance before the coming mock tournament. But for now, the nobles waited. Pitchers of honeyed wine made their rounds. Guests sipped slowly, murmuring of crops, of alliances, of the weather, the sort of talk that seemed trivial but often carried undercurrents of power. A hush fell as the seneschal, the master of the house, stepped forth to speak. "Guests of honor," he said, his voice calm but precise, "you grace our table with presence. Tonight, we celebrate not just courage or contest, but continuity. May the stories of our forebears be heard again in laughter and in flame." He bowed, and the nobles nodded in return, solemnly but with some flicker of anticipation. The seating ritual, it was said, was the foundation of order. No man could joust, no woman could cheer, no minstrel could play, not until the last guest was settled and the fire had roared 3 times. So the fire was fed again and again and again. Each time the flames rose higher and leapt toward the vaulted beams above. And only then, with the glow of orange and gold painting the long wooden tables and every chalice beginning to fog from within, only then did the feast begin to stir. The candles had burned low, their wax pooling in slow-moving rivers down iron holders shaped like ivy and antlers. Beyond the great hall's long shadows and noble distractions, behind carved doors and beneath the wooden beams, another world moved softly, a world without fanfare, but not without purpose. While lords sat high at table and ladies smiled behind linen veils, it was the humble servant who ensured the entire performance did not fray. Every cup lifted by a noble hand had been polished by another. Every slice of roasted venison had passed through hands that would never touch silk or ride a horse into glory. It began with the pages the youngest in this invisible order. Some were not yet 10 years of age, their fingers smudged with soot, their knees worn thin from kneeling on cold stone floors. They dressed in simple tunics dyed in house colors: blue for the riverlands, red for the crosslands, green for the hill-borne banners, though the fabric was coarse, and the stitching clumsy, often their own. Each morning a page rose before the dawn bell. They washed with cold water in stone basins, often shared with 3 or 4 others. The air stung their skin. Their eyes burned with sleep not yet shaken. And yet they moved without question, for to be chosen as a page, even in a lesser house, was the first step on a narrow bridge toward knighthood or clerkship. In silence, they lit the first fires of the kitchens. They fetched water from the well, sometimes 5, 6 times before the sun even rose. They polished armor that wasn't theirs. They memorized noble names, crests, and protocols, for to mistake a cousin of the lord's wife for a mere guest could result in a week of punishment duty sweeping the mews, or worse, mucking the stables. Pages delivered messages, folded scrolls, refilled goblets, and stood watch over objects no one noticed: a bowl of apples, a ring of keys, a hunting horn draped in red. They were the silent eyes of the feast, present in every corner and yet often forgotten by those who dined in comfort. Above them, and sometimes beside them, were the squires, older, stronger, and already practiced in swordplay and saddle. Squires supervised the pages, trained with knights, and spoke just a little louder in the presence of nobility, but even they answered to someone. And then there were the true keepers of the evening: the cooks, the scullions, the laundry women, the torchbearers, the wood choppers, the cheese turners, the grain sorters, Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of men and women moved behind the curtain of pageantry to make the world run. The head cook, known only as Mistress Thredda, had ruled the castle's kitchens for 3 decades. No one knew if she had a husband or a past. She was as much a fixture as the stone hearth itself. Her voice echoed over the boiling pots like thunder, and when she raised her wooden spoon, even knights flinched. Under her watch, bread was baked, venison basted, roots peeled, and herbs crushed with pestle and stone. Not a single dish was served until her crooked finger approved it. Beside the kitchen, in a chamber that always smelled of steam and lavender, the laundresses worked. They sang softly as they scrubbed fine linen and heavy cloaks in tubs of lye and ash. Their hands were red, cracked, and soaked for hours. But the garments they produced were crisp, folded, and perfumed with rosemary or mint. Further below, in the deepest parts of the keep, the cellar boys moved quietly with jugs and flasks. They tapped barrels, counted amphorae, and restacked crates of preserved fruits and dried beans. No one above noticed when the wine flowed, but they always noticed if it stopped, so the boys labored in shadow, ensuring the flow never ceased. One servant, known only as Old Elias, was charged with maintaining the torches and lanterns of the feast hall. He moved with a limp, but carried flint, iron, and spare wick on a belt of tools that jingled softly as he walked. Every flicker of flame above the nobles' heads owed something to Elias and his quiet rounds. And still, even further hidden, were the animal keepers' stable hands who fed the horses of arriving knights, brushed their manes, and mucked the stalls while the sounds of merriment drifted through narrow windows. For each stallion prancing in the parade ring, 3 young men had labored hours to clean its hooves and braid its mane. During the tournament's opening night, many of these people would never once see the joust. They would not witness the knights' names announced, nor the ladies' scarves fluttering in the air. They would hear the cheers through stone, they would feel the rumble of stomping boots. And sometimes, when all else was quiet and their hands were still, they would imagine the tournament as a dream they might one day witness. One such page, Thomas of Bray, watched through a sliver in the wall as a knight lifted his goblet to toast the feast. The boy's breath fogged the stone. His fingers held the edge of the window with reverence. He did not speak. He did not blink. Perhaps in a year he would be promoted. Perhaps in 5 he'd ride out as a squire. Or perhaps not. It didn't matter, not tonight. Tonight, he was a part of something. He was one of the unseen hands that made the world above shimmer with firelight and roasted spices. And so the servants moved on silent, sure, steady. While nobles danced and jesters tumbled, they cleared the crumbs. They replaced the wine. They tightened the laces of a knight's doublet. They hummed to themselves as the drums began to beat for the next part of the evening. A song of labor, a ballad of silence, a world beneath the world. And above it all, the feast roared on. The morning air came with the low rumble of drums, distant but deliberate, as though the earth itself was stretching its limbs in preparation for the day. From the high towers of the keep to the stables below the southern wall, there was a stillness not of silence, but of breath held, of tension suspended gently over the castle grounds like morning fog over a lake. This was no ordinary day. This was the day of the tournament. Even before the cock's first crow, a line of squires and stable hands had already begun tightening saddle straps, brushing down stallions, and applying fresh coats of oil to suits of armor that glimmered dully in the pale light. These were the tools of war-made ceremonial. Everything that might kill on a battlefield had been repurposed for sport, though not without risk. Trumpeters in the western towers warmed their lips and practiced brief blasts, repeating the same 4-note fanfare again and again until their cheeks puffed red. Just below them, young pages rolled out wide banners embroidered with lions, hawks, and silver trees, the symbols of noble houses both familiar and obscure. They unfurled across stone balconies and fluttered in the breeze, as if alive. And in the middle of the courtyard, between the wooden fences of the tourney field, the lists were being sanded, repaired, and swept one last time. Men with simple tools walked slowly along the fence, testing for splinters, checking the lashing of ropes, nodding without speaking. The field had seen 100 such tournaments before, but each one required its own preparation, its own gentle coaxing awake. The lists, a stretch of flattened earth between two barriers, was the centerpiece. Packed dirt, slightly dampened to prevent dust clouds, with hay scattered in the corners to soften the landings that everyone hoped wouldn't happen. The crowd would sit on either side of this narrow stretch, with raised wooden pavilions for the nobility, and rough benches or standing room for common folk. Above it all, a canopy of bright colors stitched into overlapping triangles offered shade and spectacle. Inside the knight's tent stitched of thick blue cloth with golden piping, Sir Alric of Thornmere stood still as his squire laced up his breastplate. Each pull of the leather strap was deliberate, tightened to just the right tension. Sir Alric, tall and weathered from many winters, said nothing. His gray eyes stared straight ahead, not out of arrogance, but out of ritual. For a knight, there was a rhythm to days like this. One must not speak too soon. Words had a weight in the hours before a lance was lowered and a horse charged forward like thunder. Outside his tent, other knights prepared as well. Some paced quietly, murmuring prayers to saints of protection and honor. Others laughed boldly, clapping one another on the shoulder with the brashness of men who feared nothing or who masked their fears with bravado. A few had squires read aloud past victories, carefully recorded in books, their pages turning gently in the wind. Among the most honored to compete was Lady Isolde of Marinwatch, the only woman on the day's roster, her silver armor polished until it gleamed like the moon. Her helm was shaped like a swan, elegant but fierce, and her squire wove small white feathers into the tail of her steed's mane. She mounted without help, the silence of the watching crowd louder than any cheer. The tension was palpable. She offered no boast, no gesture, only a nod. As the hour approached, heralds moved among the crowds with bells and scrolls, announcing the line of events: a morning joust, a midday melee, an archery display, and a final tilt between champions just before the evening feast. Their voices, trained for distance, echoed through the grounds. Sir Jorund of Kelstow will face Lady Isolde of Marinwatch in the third tilt. Sir Alric of Thornmere will ride against Sir Brannick the Red in the opening match. The melee begins at the hour of second bell. All ye noble and free, prepare thyselves. And with that, the trumpets gave a blast, crisp, clear, and triumphant. The tournament had begun. The opening procession was a slow parade, not of military precision, but of ceremonial pride. Knights rode 2 by 2, their horses clothed in flowing caparisons bearing the colors of their house. Squires walked alongside, holding crests aloft. Pages scattered flowers or rushes along the edge of the lists. Onlookers cheered, called out names, or simply watched with the kind of wide-eyed awe that only a child or a farmer might hold for those who wore steel and rode beasts of war. At the highest seat, beneath a purple awning stitched with golden threads, the lord of the castle and his honored guests sat in carved chairs, each with a goblet of honey wine or spiced cider. The lady of the castle, dressed in layered silk and a circlet of braided silver, waved to the knights as they passed. Beside her, a young prince barely old enough to speak, clapped his hands with glee. When all knights had taken their places and all horns had ceased, a single voice rose from the stands, that of the master herald. He stepped into the center of the field, his robe a vibrant mix of crimson and sapphire. He lifted his staff high, its silver head glinting in the sunlight. Let it be known before gods and men that on this day, under the banner of peace and sport, the tournament of High Vale shall commence. Honor shall be tested, courage shall be shown. Let no man nor woman forget that chivalry is the thread from which the realm is stitched. A cheer rose, rolling like a wave through the onlookers. From the kitchens, even the cooks paused, ears straining to hear the booming words. In the stables, horses stamped in place, sensing the electric air. And then the tilt. The first two knights rode to their ends of the lists. Lances were checked for cracks, visors lowered, shields angled just so. Sir Auric's horse snorted and stamped. Sir Brannock's eyes were unreadable behind his helm. A hush fell, even the wind held its breath. And then the trumpet sounded. They charged. Two thunderclaps of hooves on hard earth, two blurs of steel and color, a heartbeat, and then the loud crack of splintering lance. Wooden shards flew into the air. One knight leaned, but held firm. The other reeled, caught in the shoulder, nearly unseated, but upright still. The crowd erupted a sound like the sea breaking over rocks. And so it continued, tilt after tilt, each with his own tension, each with its own bloom of splinters, gasps, cheers, and moments of stunned silence. When Lady Isolde faced Sir Jorand, the lists were especially quiet. She rode like the wind, her lance steady, her form perfect. On their first pass, she struck true a hit to the breastplate that rattled the crowd. On the second, she was hit hard in return, sparks flying from her armor. And on the third, they struck one another in such perfect unison that both lances shattered at once, raining down like splinters from a tree struck by lightning. By midday, the sun hung high and hot, and the melee began a chaotic swirl of knights on foot, with blunted swords and heavy shields. It was not as graceful as the joust, but just as noble in its way. Dust rose in clouds, armor clanged like bells, and always there were cheers. But behind it all, beyond the spectacle and thunder, was something quieter, a kind of shared dream, a nostalgia for glory, a longing for honor. The tournament was not just for the knights. It was for the people a story they could carry into winter, a tale to pass down, to dream on. By late afternoon, the crowds began to thin. Merchants packed up sweetmeats and candied almonds. Children fell asleep on blankets. Even the horses stood quieter, as if listening to some fading echo. And still, the field stood, trampled, marked, yet proud. The tournament had begun and would not be soon forgotten. The distant clang of a bell echoes from behind the tall wooden gates, muffled slightly by the dense tapestries that hang across the walls. The sound seems to ripple through the air, followed by a hushed pause that settles over the arena like a velvet curtain. For a moment, the rustling of tunics, the gentle clatter of mugs being set aside, and the low murmur of conversation stills. All eyes, noble and commoner alike, turn toward the far end of the field, where something is about to emerge from beyond the great portcullis. And then, with a slow groan of timbers and a rhythmic creak of old iron, the heavy doors begin to part. The first glimpse is of sunlight glinting off polished metal. A mounted knight steps forward, his warhorse clad in a draping of quilted cloth, stitched with house colors bold reds, emerald greens, or deep sapphire blues. The horse's hooves crunch softly against the sand of the tilt yard, each step practiced and even, as though it too understands the ritual unfolding. The knight's armor glints faintly, reflecting candlelight from above, though here and there you can just make out the faint scuffs and scratches tokens from previous encounters. He raises his lance slowly, not in threat, but in salute. A trumpet sounds, drawn out and high-pitched, sending a trill across the arena. A second knight appears now, from the opposite end of the field, and now the stage is set. This isn't war, not today. This is spectacle, a carefully measured dance of ritual and reputation, a performance where the swing of a sword or the thundering gallop of a destrier speaks as loudly as any courtly proclamation. But even in this pageantry, the danger is real. That lance is no illusion, that armor is not light, and the horses, massive and muscular, are not simply props. Each movement requires precision and strength. A squire walks briskly across the field now, checking the integrity of the rail that divides the tilt yard. The barrier, long and narrow, ensures that knights do not collide head-on, and that their lances meet at proper angles. It also makes the joust feel like an elegant contest of geometry, speed, distance, angle, and force. The squire nods once to the officiant, who raises a hand. From high in the noble balconies, a herald calls out names and titles, some genuine, others perhaps generously embellished for dramatic flair. The crowd responds with cheers and polite applause, depending on which knight hails from which realm. Though no kingdom is truly at stake tonight, the loyalty in the cheers feels real enough. The knights nudge their horses forward, hooves dig in, the sand shifts, one heartbeat, two, then they charge. The thunder of hooves begins low, like distant storm clouds rolling in. It swells quickly, filling the ears with a raw, heavy rhythm. The lances lower in tandem, perfectly parallel to the ground, tips aimed with steady precision. As they close the distance 30 feet, 20-10 time feels oddly slowed. Eyes narrow behind visors. The crowd holds its breath. And then, with a shattering crack, the first clash. One lance splinters cleanly against a pauldron, shards flying into the air like wooden confetti. The sound is sharp and sudden, followed by a collective gasp from the audience. The knight wobbles slightly, but does not fall. He reins his horse in at the end of the tilt, breathing heavily, shaking off the impact. The herald quickly updates the score. Points are awarded not just for striking, but for where the lance landed, how well it shattered, and whether the knight maintained balance. A clean hit to the chest garners more than a mere graze. Dislodging one's opponent from the saddle, though rare, is the ultimate triumph. Between runs, squires rush out with fresh lances. The knights confer briefly with their attendants, adjusting straps, resetting armor, sipping water from leather flasks. Though the matches are choreographed with etiquette, every participant knows that bruises are guaranteed. Some carry them like badges of honor. The second run begins with equal force. Another charge, another impact, another eruption of applause. The tension is hypnotic. The repetition, oddly soothing. Throughout the performance, the mood is celebratory, not competitive. This isn't about humiliation or domination. It's about reenactment, tradition, and transporting the audience into a world where valor and chivalry rule the day. And, for the knights, actors, and athletes, both it is a chance to embody legends, if only for a few minutes at a time. On the far side of the arena, a knight bows deeply toward the royal balcony, then removes his helm. His hair is tousled, cheeks pink from exertion, but he wears a warm, humble smile. The princess, seated regally in her throne above, gives the faintest nod, a gentle touch of approval. As the joust concludes, both knights ride side by side down the center of the tilt yard. The crowd roars with appreciation, stomping boots, clapping hands, waving flags. Children cheer from their seats, wide-eyed and giddy, their imaginations now steeped in tales of courage and competition. But slowly, like a tide receding, the noise begins to soften. The sand settles once more. The squires return with brooms, smoothing out the track. The trumpets fall silent. The wood smoke from the kitchen begins to drift in again, blending the scent of roast meats and spiced cider with the fading aroma of sweat and sand. The knights disappear behind the great doors once again. The armor is heavy, but it comes off eventually. The horses are fed, rubbed down, and blanketed for the evening. The lances are stacked in careful rows, awaiting the next contest. And the arena exhales. Another match complete. Another night of pageantry folded gently into the fabric of tradition. The candlelight flickers on the high walls. The audience settles deeper into their benches. Cups are refilled. Platters passed again. The tournament has many chapters still ahead. And the night, like the history it celebrates, rolls gently forward. The echoes of the joust still linger softly in the minds of those gathered, like the final notes of a harp string slowly fading into a vaulted hall. Outside the tournament grounds, a hush begins to fall over the sand-dusted tilt yard. Yet inside the great hall, the warmth of the evening grows richer, like honey left in the Sunday. This is where the true magic of the medieval experience unfurls, not with sword or steed, but with ladle, platter, and the comforting hum of communal joy. The great feasting hall is enormous, its wooden beams high and arched like the ribs of a ship turned upside down. The ceiling creaks occasionally with the stretch of old timber, the gentle settling of time passing overhead. Banners hang from the rafters, bright heraldic symbols that flutter gently as the breeze from the open windows dances through the room. Candles flicker in heavy wrought iron chandeliers, their light pooled warmly across the long rows of wooden tables. You can hear at first the clink of metal goblets being set on thick oaken boards, the rustle of linen sleeves as servers move with careful grace, the murmur of anticipation rising like a gentle tide. In the air, a dozen scents swirl and mingle, roasting meats, warm bread fresh from stone ovens, herbs both familiar and strange bay, rosemary, hyssop, and lovage, all blending in a soft, savory bouquet. The guests begin to take their seats. Long benches line the great hall, arranged beneath trestle tables so polished that the wood glows faintly under the candlelight. There are no assigned places, only sections by allegiance. Those seated on the left wear cloth bands of deep crimson, the right-hand guests wear emerald green. Though tonight there is no true competition. The divisions are ceremonial, theatrical. All are here to feast together. At the far end of the hall, raised just slightly above the rest, sits the royal table, an ornate spread behind which the king and queen of the evening preside. Their thrones are grand, carved from dark walnut and inlaid with brass, softened by cushions of velvet. The king wears a circlet of gold and faux jewels. The queen a simple tiara that glitters subtly when she leans toward a servant to whisper. Their role is not one of power, but of presence, a gentle reminder of the stories being woven tonight. This is their court, their guests, their celebration. A hush falls over the room. A lone figure enters from the side tall, cloaked in robes of cream and indigo. The herald. He raises a scroll and, with great theatrical gravitas, begins to read the royal proclamation. It's part introduction, part invitation, and part blessing upon the coming meal. His voice rolls gently across the room, low, rhythmic, and slightly musical. His words are archaic but soothing, conjuring images of distant lands, noble quests, and kitchens ablaze with activity. And then, as he lowers the scroll, a small army of servers begins to stream in. The feast begins not with a shout, but with the sound of silver platters being gently placed down. One by one they arrive, borne aloft by pages in livery, each dish announced in quiet tones and set with reverence before clusters of hungry guests. The first course is light, almost modest. Trenchers of coarse, crusty bread are set down, their centers hollowed slightly to hold thick stews or dips. Bowls of herbed butter appear beside wedges of soft, crumbly cheese, both mild and sharp. There are pickled onions, tart and crisp, and bowls of sliced apples dusted with cinnamon. Some guests nibble quietly, while others raise goblets filled with watered wine or honeyed mead, taking their first long, slow sip. No forks are present. This is a time of fingers, of wooden spoons and shared platters. There's no rush. Each bite is taken deliberately. Between mouthfuls, laughter starts to bubble in quiet patches. Someone tells a story of a knight's fall during the joust, and nearby diners chuckle softly. The mood is gentle, warm, and steeped in simple pleasures. Then comes the second course, a parade of meats so succulent the scent alone seems to soften the shoulders of everyone present. Platters of roasted chicken, glazed with herbs and basted in wine, are passed down the table. There are tender cuts of pork, rubbed with garlic and sage, steaming bowls of venison stew thick with barley and carrots, and spitted sausages tinged with smoky paprika. But the centerpiece, a true spectacle, is the arrival of a whole roasted peacock. Its feathers, preserved and cleaned, are affixed back upon the bird's form in dazzling blues and greens, arranged into a fan display as if the creature were still alive. Though the meat itself is rarely eaten, often replaced with chicken or pheasant inside the ornate presentation, it remains a symbol of medieval opulence, of beauty and ceremony combined. Wine flows freely now, though in controlled portions. Mead, too sweet and golden, like melted sunshine, fills goblets and warms bellies. The servers move through the aisles with practiced ease, replacing empty pitchers, offering fresh trenchers, and wiping down platters before new ones arrive. The room is alive with comfort but not chaos. Every detail is quietly tended to. By the third course, the flavors shift. Bowls of pottage are set down, a thick, porridge-like dish made from oats, vegetables, and hints of meat or fish. There's a surprising softness to its taste, earthy, creamy, and deeply nourishing. This, after all, was the true staple of many medieval tables. Next to it are stewed beans, slices of rye bread with onion jam, and turnips roasted until golden and sweet. The dishes may seem humble, but the preparation is delicate. No one is hurried. The food speaks for itself. For a moment, you might close your eyes. The hum of conversation, the warm weight of food in your belly, the soft flicker of candlelight, it's easy to drift here. To imagine you've always known the rhythm of medieval feasts, that you've attended hundreds, that the people seated beside you are old friends, bonded not by blood or past, but by this gentle shared moment of comfort. The fourth and final course is sweet. From the kitchen come pastries dusted with honey and filled with nuts. There are poached pears soaked in spiced wine, their skins translucent and shimmering. Bowls of custard, thick and pale yellow, are spooned into wooden cups. There are seed cakes, biscuits flavored with rosewater, and dried figs wrapped in leaves. Everything is soft, nothing too sharp or aggressive. The sweetness is mild, balanced. A lullaby in food form. The torches along the walls are dimmed slightly now. The air is thicker, but not unpleasant. The fire at the center of the hall glows brighter, drawing some guests nearer. The king and queen stand and raise their cups, offering a toast, not with bluster or pomp, but with a simple "to the night." And everyone echoes, "To the night." It's a moment of shared silence. Not grand, not thunderous, just gentle, as if time itself has paused to exhale. The dishes are cleared, guests linger. Some rise and stroll slowly through the hall. Others stay seated, finishing the last of their mead, listening to the lute player near the hearth begin a quiet melody. It's a tune with no name, one that meanders like a lazy brook through a forest. It carries no urgency, no destination, only presence. As the hall begins to settle, the servers move like ghosts, collecting plates, folding linens, and extinguishing a few of the candles. The great feast is over, but the warmth remains. You can feel it in the floorboards, in the benches, in the smile of the minstrel as he plucks another gentle note. And somewhere outside, beyond the heavy wooden doors, the stars have begun to stitch themselves across the night sky. The tournament field, now lit with the orange kiss of evening torchlight, holds more than the echoes of hooves and splinters. It holds the weight of something invisible, yet ever-present honor. A quiet expectation that every man clad in armor carries within his heart a code older than the banners above the stands. As the last rays of sun glide over the banners lying rampant, fleur-de-lis, three bores the crowd begins to murmur less, as if sensing the shift from spectacle to solemn tradition. Chivalry, that oft-spoken and rarely understood concept, was not merely a list of rules etched into the mind of a knight. It was lived in gesture, in word choice, in the silence before a sword was drawn. Each knight seated in the tournament tonight has spent a lifetime cloaked in that code, learning it as a child, swearing to it as a squire, embodying it as a man. Long before their names echoed across the arena, these knights were boys in drafty stone keeps, taught by elders in woolen robes and worn-out leather to always speak truth, to shield the innocent, to protect the weak, to honor God, to obey the liege lord, and to never stray from duty even when the task grew bitter or the path uncertain. Some would say such a code is idealized, romantic. But in this candlelit recreation of the Middle Ages, it's less about the truth and more about the memory, and the memory is one of glowing reverence. There's a hush as a lone figure walks into the sand of the tournament ring. He carries no weapon, only a scroll. The crowd leans in with quiet anticipation. The scroll is bound in blue silk, embroidered with a silver griffin, a symbol older than the kingdoms it once guarded. He stops in the center of the field and opens it with the careful grace of ritual. From his lips come the words of the knight's oath, not shouted, but spoken slowly, as if to weave them into the very air. Each phrase, though familiar to those in the audience who've come before, lands with a weight that even children can sense. I vow upon my sword and my soul to be ever loyal, ever just, ever brave. I shall not break faith, nor turn from the cry of the defenseless. My word shall be my bond, my arm, the defender of the realm, my heart, ever true, ever honorable, ever steadfast. And in unison, the knights seated in the great chairs, each in colors unique to their heritage, place one fist over their hearts. It is a quiet moment, but one that resonates deeper than a clash of swords. They do not speak, but their stillness speaks for them. Around the ring, guests sip from goblets of mead or grape juice disguised in golden cups. They munch slowly on buttered corn and roasted chicken legs wrapped in linen. But for a few minutes, the feast seems secondary, suspended in time by something older than pageantry, a collective pause, a respect for a code whose echo still reaches modern hearts. Backstage, away from the crowds, younger performers and crew members prepare for the next event, yet even among them, the mood is hushed. They know what follows the oath is the most serious display of the night, not in danger, but in dignity. You may be tempted to dismiss it all as theater, but that would be like ignoring the warmth of a fire because it is man-made. These moments are carefully crafted, yes, but crafted from something deeply human. A longing for structure, for purpose, for a sense that the world can still be navigated by honor. The knight's code, while never written on a single tablet or rulebook, filtered through centuries, carried on the backs of poets, clergy, and war horses. In some centuries, it bloomed into the romance of courtly love, with knights composing verses to unreachable ladies from castle balconies. In others, it hardened into survival where honor was not poetry, but a line drawn in blood and mud on battlefields half frozen by winter. But here, tonight, it becomes something more digestible, something we can absorb in the comfort of air conditioning and candlelit illusion. We can marvel without fear, learn without injury, and remember without needing to reenact. The knights now rise as one, not with bravado, but with grace. Their movements are choreographed, yes, but also deeply respectful of the tradition they mimic. Each knight steps forward toward the center dais and kneels before a wooden altar draped in velvet. Upon it rests no relic, but rather a simple sword, unsheathed, resting flat. One by one, each knight places their palm above the sword and bows their head. No words are spoken aloud, but in that bow there lies centuries of culture, of stories passed in quiet moments beside campfires, of promises made in cold stone chapels, and of legacies built upon how a man kept his word. Children in the crowd watch rapt. Some sit upright in their chairs, tiny fists pressed to their own chests, mimicking the knights. For them, this moment may be the spark, the beginning of a lifelong fascination, a seed of respect for things like valor, commitment, and humility. For others, adults wearied by modern chaos, it is a comfort, a reminder that dignity still has a place, even if it wears chainmail and bows with silent solemnity. The scene fades gently. No booming music or roaring crowd marks its end. Just the soft return of lute melodies and the gentle rustle of fabric as knights return to their seats. It is the stillness after the sermon, the breath before the battle. The crowd doesn't cheer yet. They don't need to. The weight of that moment, heavy and warm like wool, settles over the arena like dusk. It is not the clang of weapons that lingers now, but the quiet gravity of oaths made and remembered. Somewhere high above, banners sway softly, as if in approval, and in that quiet space, lulled by warm food and older ideals, you might find your eyes growing heavy. Not from boredom, but from the gentle peace that comes when something ancient is honored, without cynicism, without noise. Just a soft reminder, wrapped in velvet and candlelight, that once upon a time, honor was everything. And for tonight, in this small recreated kingdom, its still island, while guests return to their feasts and the knights resume their seats beneath the swaying banners, there exists a quiet world just beyond the arena, an invisible realm of gears and pulleys, of backstage whispers and dusty corridors. This is the hidden heart of the castle, the place where illusion takes shape before it steps into the light. You may not see it as you sip from a goblet or cheer for your knight, but every moment you witness was born behind that curtain, carefully rehearsed, lovingly prepared, and gently coaxed into being by hands you'll never shake. The hallway behind the arena smells of straw and leather, where soft lantern light glows against the pale beige of stone-painted walls. It's quieter here. The sounds of cheering and hoofbeats still echo from beyond, muffled by thick curtains and aged wooden beams. But here, in this narrow passage, time slows even further. A young squire, no older than 17, runs a linen cloth over the length of a saddle. His hands move with practiced care, not rushed, not idle. The leather was cleaned yesterday and the day before, yet he still tends to it now, smoothing invisible imperfections. A nearby hook holds several bits of polished steel spurs, stirrups, small links of chainmail waiting to be added to a performer's attire. Everything must gleam, because in the soft glow of torchlight, even the smallest detail contributes to the illusion of nobility. Further down the hall, a costume mistress inspects a row of capes hanging from wooden pegs. Her fingers flutter like birds, straightening hems and checking clasps. One cape bears a dark wine-red crest of a boar against gold. Another is embroidered with silver stars on midnight blue. She knows which knight wears what. She knows who sweats more, who rides harder, who forgets to remove their gloves before unfastening their cloak. She says nothing, but remembers everything. Her world is measured not in hours, but in stitches. In a dimly lit corner, a farrier gently lifts a horse's hoof. The steed, tall and calm, breathes steadily as the man inspects the iron shoe with a small metal file. Sparks do not fly here. This is not the dramatic pounding of a medieval forge. This is quiet maintenance. The horse doesn't flinch, neither does the farrier. They've danced this dance before. Every performance is made possible not just by what the audience sees, but by these invisible rhythms: hoof, file, breath, patience. The training ring just beyond the inner corridor smells faintly of hay and soil. The dirt is softer here, less packed than the tournament floor. A single torch illuminates the far side, where a young rider practices a tight corner turn. The steed responds beautifully, ears alert, hooves barely making a sound. The rider wears a simple tunic and padded vest, not the gleaming armor the audience expects. This is the rehearsal beneath the dream, the hour before the overture, the echo of the story yet to be told. Backstage, wooden props lean gently against stone walls, lances dulled at the tips for safety, shields lightly scratched from yesterday's match. A workman in a brown smock wipes down the grip of a practice sword. He doesn't speak, doesn't rush. He's done this hundreds of times. Every stroke of the cloth is a small prayer for tomorrow's performance. The performers, too, have their quiet corners. A few knights sit near a wall-length mirror lit by rows of yellow-tinted bulbs, the modern world peeking through in these backstage glimpses. They don't break character, not quite, but their posture softens. One removes his helmet and gently rubs the bridge of his nose. Another reaches for a tin of lip balm tucked inside a belt pouch, left unseen beneath his crimson surcoat. They talk, but not loudly. Their voices blend with the hum of preparation. It's not just a show. It's a rhythm. Nearby, a rider adjusts the black leather bridle of her Andalusian stallion. She whispers soft encouragements, rubbing the horse's neck, coaxing familiarity back into his steps. Though she won't be seen in the spotlight, her timing, her control, her confidence all feed the fantasy of the court. A small office in the back holds rows of labeled binders, schedules printed in careful fonts, and a large whiteboard scrawled with notes in erasable ink. Check lighting cue for second act. New ribbon color for Green Knight's lance. Foam padding for Prince's fall. It's a living ledger of the magic made visible each night. A reminder that behind every thunderous cheer lies a checklist, and behind every legendary sword fight, a calendar entry marked rehearsal, 2 p.m. Down another hall, the kitchen bustles, but not with noise. It's a hushed urgency. Stews are stirred in great silver pots. Trays of roasted vegetables are passed along a line. Apple slices are fanned out like cards upon decorative platters. The chefs wear no pointed hats or medieval garb. Their uniforms are simple. Their focus is total. Everything must be hot, fresh, quiet. The illusion holds only if the meal arrives at the perfect moment, neither too soon nor too late. And then there are the sounds, the backstage sounds, the soft whinny of a horse as it shifts in its stable, the creak of a saddle, the tap of boot heels on ancient stone tiles, the faint fizz of fabric rubbed against velvet, a sigh, a laugh, the almost melodic rustle of someone checking costume, class one final time, the faint click of a walkie-talkie being turned down just low enough not to interrupt the mood. Every person behind the curtain knows their role, not just the role on paper, but the unspoken one keeper of magic, guardian of immersion, silent sculptor of dream. None of them will take a bow. None of their names are embroidered on banners. But without them, the illusion would dissolve. As the trumpet call signals the next act, a flurry of quiet motion stirs. Knights gather their gear. Horses are led gently to their marks. A curtain shifts. A torch is checked. And in a breathless moment between invisibility and spectacle, all the pieces align. Then the curtain rises. The stage floods with color and clamor. The audience cheers, wine is lifted, flags waved. But back here, in the hush behind the flame, it is still, peaceful, reverent. They've done their part. And as the pageantry plays out under painted banners, this hidden world returns to stillness. The young squire resumes his saddle work. The farrier tends another hoof. The costume mistress tightens another seam. It continues, like clockwork powered not by gears, but by care. So if ever you find yourself at such a performance, eating warm bread and watching lances shatter in a clash of colors and creeds, remember this: the magic you see was born in silence, in patience, and in countless unseen hands. And in that quiet knowledge, let yourself rest. The moment the horn sounded across the vast wooden rafters, every guest, noble or peasant, turned their head toward the grand gates of the arena. The silence that had been gently humming around the banquet tables was pierced by the proud bellow of a conch shell, blown by a page with puffed cheeks and a look of immense responsibility painted on his youthful face. With that singular note, the field of honor came to life, stirring the audience from their gentle, digesting stupor into quiet attention. The dirt of the arena floor had been carefully raked earlier in the day, smoothed over by dedicated hands wielding wooden drags. Horseshoe prints from the morning's rehearsals had been brushed away, and fresh sawdust scattered to reduce slipping. Though the field was intentionally modest in size, it felt immense in presence, bound on all sides by wooden fencing and lined with high poles from which colorful banners snapped and waved like birds ready to take flight. From beneath the east gate came the sound of hooves, slow at first, deliberate, the kind of pace that announced something ceremonial rather than urgent. Out rode the herald, dressed not in armor but in rich wool and a sash of golden embroidery. He bore a banner in each hand and trotted to the center of the field where he raised them high. With a shout, he called the names of the two knights who would compete first, a proclamation repeated by pages stationed at various ends of the hall, so that even those seated farthest from the action might hear. The crowd did not erupt, not in the way a modern stadium might. Instead, there were murmurs of approval, the rustle of gowns shifting, the clink of goblets being momentarily set down. Some guests nodded politely. Others whispered to companions, perhaps predicting who might unhorse the other, or recalling tales they'd heard of the knight's prior feats. It was not so much sport as ceremony, a graceful extension of the evening's theme, a tribute to honor, valor, and the high-stakes grace of mounted combat. Then, from the shadows beneath the western gate, the first knight appeared. He wore gleaming armor, polished to a mirrored finish, which reflected the torches that flanked the entryway in warm, dancing glints. His helmet, a grand-crested piece with a snarling beast molded atop it, concealed his face entirely, giving him a faceless, statuesque authority. His steed, a muscular destrier clad in velvet barding and chainmail skirts, seemed to understand the importance of his role, keeping a solemn pace as if rehearsed for years. The second knight followed moments later, and though his armor was darker and less polished, it bore more visible mark scratches from previous matches, the hint of battle-worn experience. His horse snorted with every step, a spirited beast with fiery eyes and a restless gait. Between them, at the center of the arena, stood the master of the list, the field judge. He held a long staff and raised it to signal the competitors to halt. The ritual of the joust began. First, the knights saluted the noble's dais, lowering their lances in a gesture of deference. Then, they turned to one another and repeated the motion acknowledging mutual respect before combat. Their squires, nimble boys barely into manhood, dashed across the sand to deliver final adjustments, tightening a strap here, passing a water flask, or placing a favor a token from a lady in the knight's gauntlet. A hush fell again. With a thunderous bark, the master of the list dropped his staff. The horses leapt forward. The crowd inhaled as one. The rhythmic drumbeat of hooves on earth echoed against every timber beam of the enclosed hall. The knights, now upright and aiming their lances, bore down upon one another with startling velocity. Sand kicked up in plumes. The fabric of their mounts' caparisons fluttered like sails in a storm. And then impact. The sound was sharp, a crack like dry wood splitting, as one lance exploded against the other's shield. One rider jolted in his saddle, wobbling for a moment but managing to stay seated. The other slowed, lifting his broken weapon to show the judges a clear and fair strike. The audience released their breath collectively, followed by a respectful round of applause measured, calm, and appropriate. Jousting in this context was not about blood. It was performance, yes, but not a hollow one. These men had trained since boyhood. They risked their limbs for a few moments of flight, for the glory of being watched. It was a pageant of power, a staged test of character under the guise of controlled danger. Between rounds, servants scurried to rake the sand anew. Torches were adjusted. A trio of musicians perched in the gallery played a slow melody on lutes, and recorders filling the quiet with a tune meant to bridge the space between excitement and contemplation. The next pair entered, and the scene repeated. Some lances missed entirely, splintering against the wooden guardrails. Others struck with such precision that their target was thrown from his mount, entirely landing with a metallic thud in the dirt and rising, dazed but uninjured, to the cheers of the crowd. Throughout the evening, the line between play and prowess blurred, and it was not only the combatants who watched one another. Eyes from the crowd often flicked toward the high seats, where nobles and royalty whispered behind fans, assessing not just the performances but the bearers of favors, the subtle signs of courtly flirtation and silent challenges. To be seen at such an event was as valuable as winning it. There was one particularly dramatic past two nights so equally matched that 3 tilts yielded no victor. They retired in a draw, a rare but honored outcome, met with gentle applause and murmurs of well fought throughout the tables. The final bout of the evening was ceremonial, staged between a knight and his squire, clearly not equals in skill, but meant to offer levity. The squire exaggerated every fall, flailing humorously and drawing laughter even from the more rigid nobles. It was the closing note, a reminder that even in the world of armor and aggression, there was room for levity and entertainment. As the final torch was lowered and the sand fell quiet once more, the guests returned to their wine, their sweets, their stories. The joust had concluded, but the night, rich with pomp and performance, still had more tales to tell. Tomorrow, perhaps, they would recall the spark of a lance meeting shield, or the steely silence of a knight dismounted, or the soft rustle of banners beneath the moonlight. But for now, the arena slept, and the memories of chivalry danced gently into the dreams of those who witnessed its fleeting glory. As the echo of hooves faded and the final fragments of broken lances were cleared from the arena floor, a new rhythm began to take hold within the grand hall. It was slower, gentler, a winding down rather than a winding up, and yet it pulsed with a kind of warmth that only the evening's latter half could carry, like the amber glow of embers after a roaring fire. From the wings of the hall, where the shadows clung like stage curtains, emerged a procession of minstrels and musicians. Lutes were tuned with quiet diligence, harp strings plucked softly to test their pitch. One by one, they climbed to the small, elevated gallery that overlooked the tables and torches. There, beneath the carved wooden arches of the minstrel's loft, they began to play. The music was not commanding. It asked for no attention. Instead, it offered a gentle thread, weaving between conversations, drifting above candlelight, wrapping around goblets and trencher platters like invisible garlands. It was the kind of music meant not for performance, but for ambiance, for the quiet joy of presence. Guests, once riveted by the spectacle of jousting, now turned their attention to one another. Plates were replenished. Platters of roasted boar and spiced root vegetables were passed along the length of tables. Sweetmeats, delicate and jewel-toned, appeared alongside new rounds of cider and dark ale. The clatter of cutlery softened into a kind of pleasing murmur, a familiar domestic rhythm played out on a grand stage. At the high table, the lord and lady of the manor raised their cups once more. Their faces, previously composed in the solemn appreciation of sport, now wore softened smiles. The lady reached for a pear soaked in honey and cinnamon, while the lord leaned back in his ornate chair, letting the comfort of well-earned merriment settle over his shoulders like a velvet cloak. Nearby, a jester tumbled into view, clad in a patchwork of colored fabric, bells jingling at his ankles. He made a circuit of the tables with practiced ease. His humor was light, never cruel. He balanced goblets on his head, recited rhymed riddles, and feigned fright at the sight of a roasted turnip. Laughter rippled gently across the room, not the loud guffaws of a tavern, but the genteel mirth of an audience content to be amused without disruption. The servers, still swift but now more relaxed in posture, moved with the ease of those who knew the night's pace had shifted. Trays of mead were passed with smiling nods. Linen napkins were replenished. Even the youngest pages, wide-eyed and exhausted from a day of running errands, allowed themselves to slow their steps and steal quick glances at the merriment unfolding around them. From time to time, a minstrel's voice rose above the instruments, a ballad of love lost to war, or a tale of a knight who mistook a fox for a dragon. These stories, sung with lilting phrasing and long, drawn-out vowels, were less about narrative than rhythm. They lulled the listeners, the way waves hush a shoreline, eyes drifted shut. Heads leaned closer together. The world seemed to contract into a space filled with flickering candlelight and the comforting drone of soft music. At one table, a group of guests took turns attempting to tell their own stories, some real, others surely embellished. One man described seeing a comet cross the sky on the very night his child was born. Another claimed to have dined once with a Saracen prince who owned a pet leopard trained to bow before meals. The veracity of the tales mattered little. What mattered was the telling the way each voice carried a piece of the speaker's soul across the room. Elsewhere, a game of chance unfolded over a spare piece of parchment and a pair of carved dice. There were no great sums at stake, only the thrill of luck and the joy of friendly rivalry. The players leaned in, casting the dice with exaggerated flair, cheering or groaning with equal enthusiasm regardless of the outcome. In the far corner of the hall, where the torchlight dimmed into shadows, a small group of dancers formed. Their movements were not elaborate simple circles, hand-holding steps, sways that matched the tempo of the minstrels above. There was no pretense of formality, no need for courtly instruction. This was not a royal ball. It was something humbler and, in many ways, more honest. A shared expression of the body's joy, of the soul's contentment, of community and closeness. Outside, the night deepened. Stars blinked above the stone parapets, distant and unhurried. A breeze carried the smell of dew and the far-off smoke of kitchen fires that had now been reduced to smoldering ash. Occasionally, an owl called from the nearby woods, its voice echoing faintly through the castle windows. Within, the warmth of revelry held strong. The hearths continued to burn low. The last of the stews and sauces were ladled out to those who lingered. Some guests had already retired to their chambers, full and sleepy, wrapped in woolen cloaks and guided by yawning attendants. Others remained at the tables, their voices quieter now, conversations drifting like smoke. The lord and lady stood at last. Their rising sent a ripple through the hall. Guests bowed their heads. The minstrels paused. The jester froze in place, mid-contortion. With a nod and a brief, soft-spoken thanks to all who had joined the evening, the host departed through the grand doors, their footsteps softened by the thick carpets underfoot. And still, some remained. The night did not end all at once, but faded like a page closing gently, its ink still warm. The hall dimmed by degrees, one torch extinguished, then another. A servant tiptoed across the floor, sweeping away crumbs, collecting empty goblets. A final song was strummed on a single lute string, a lullaby, perhaps, or simply a chord held for the sake of lingering. When the last guest departed and the great doors were drawn closed, a hush returned. The tables stood quiet once more. The banners no longer fluttered, but within the great wooden beams of the ceiling, within the stone bones of the walls, the echoes of mead and minstrels, of laughter and lore, lingered. And somewhere far above, beneath the unblinking stars, the spirit of the evening continued unhurried, unwatched, but deeply remembered. The light does not rush in, but gently seeps through the forest canopy, filtered by mist and softened by silence. It spills over mossy stones and dew-beaded leaves, gilding the landscape with the muted gold of a medieval morning. The castle beyond the trees still slumbers, its towers outlined in gray, its turrets peaking just above the rising fog. But in the quiet grove behind the stables, the day has already begun for one solitary figure. The falconer. He stands by a wooden shed half covered in ivy, his movements unhurried. A leather glove hangs from his belt, worn but lovingly maintained. His breath plumes in the cool morning air as he stirs the embers in a clay brazier beside him, coaxing them to life with practiced care. No roaring flame is needed, just a low, steady warmth, enough to chase the chill and offer comfort to feathered companions not yet fully stirred from sleep. Perched on a wooden rail nearby, in a row of individual stations, are the birds. Falcons, hawks, and one solemn old owl, all hooded, their small leather caps shielding their eyes from the light and the noise of waking life. They shift gently, the metal bells tied to their jesses chiming faintly less like music and more like memories. The falconer moves among them with reverence, not haste. Each bird is checked, each tether gently inspected. A finger runs down the curve of each talon, over the long outer feathers, through the chest plumage. He speaks to them in soft murmurs, not expecting understanding, but offering comfort. His voice is neither loud nor commanding, but consistent a rhythm the birds know well. He begins with the young saker falcon, its feathers still mottled from youth, its shoulders strong and eager. The falconer unfastens the hood, and the bird blinks into the light, eyes round and amber. He holds her steady, letting her adjust to the morning while stroking the ridge above her beak. She leans into the touch just slightly and gives a sharp exhale through her nostrils, a sound like the faintest hiss of wind through dry reeds. Next is the kestrel, smaller and quick-eyed, known for her sharp turns and fearless dives. She is fed a morsel of quail meat, which she snatches with quick precision from the gloved hand. Not a sound of crunching, not even a drop left behind, just a flash of beak and a satisfied shift of wings. The birds are not flown yet. That will come later, when the air is warmer, when the world is more awake. For now, the falconer observes them like a scholar with scrolls, reading the posture of each wing, the steadiness of each gaze, the curve of every claw. These are not pets, they are partners. And this ritual, practiced before most are out of bed, is the quiet foundation of that trust. Behind him, a boy yawns and stumbles into view his apprentice. No older than 10, red-cheeked and wrapped in a wool tunic too big for his frame. The falconer nods without turning. The boy knows what to do. Together, they carry out the morning routine, silent but synchronized. The apprentice checks the perch stations, refills the small water troughs. He brushes down the splashes of bird droppings from the wooden beams and replaces the sand in the collection trays. His movements are clumsy but earnest. The falconer says nothing, knowing correction can wait for a quieter moment. For now, it is enough that the boy is here, learning the rhythm. A rooster calls in the distance. The first clang of a stable bell follows. Somewhere beyond the forest's edge, the day is stirring boots crunching on gravel, servants filling pails, firewood being stacked. But here, among the birds, the air remains still. The falconer takes up his glove, thick and worn, and gestures for the peregrine, the most experienced of his birds. Her hood is unfastened with care, and her head turns slowly as if remembering the shapes of trees, the outlines of prey, the vast open skies she sometimes dreams of. He lifts his arm, and she steps onto the glove with quiet dignity. The apprentice holds out the small wooden chest where the flight jesses are kept, along with extra hoods, spare bells, and tiny buckles. The falconer chooses a set of braided leather straps and secures them to the bird's legs. Then he walks with her slowly out to the open field just beyond the trees. There, a single training perch awaits, a tall wooden post topped with a worn cushion of stitched cloth. He raises his arm high. The falcon does not need to be told. She leaps. There is no dramatic cry, no flurry of wings, just the soft thrum of air displaced as she rises and circles, her path controlled, her instincts keen. She glides once, then twice, and lands perfectly on the perch. The falconer watches her, arms folded. The apprentice watches him. He nods. The lesson is going well. This will continue for some time, bird after bird, each with its own flight path, its own strengths and quirks. Not all are meant for show. Some are recovering from injury. Some are retired. Others are too young or too unruly, but each is part of the whole, Each is seen, respected, and cared for. By mid-morning, the sun has risen above the tree line. The mists retreat. The birds are returned to their perches. Some are hooded again, others allowed to preen and rest in the warmth of the Sunday. The brazier is now cold, its last embers blackened and still. The apprentice is sent to fetch a small pail of oats for the stable horses. And the falconer? He sits for a moment beneath the low branches of an ash tree and removes his gloves. In his lap, he lays a small length of leather, which he begins to stitch, slowly repairing a falcon's hood, threading the needle with practiced precision. His eyes, though tired, are calm. There is no need to rush. Above him the birds watch, silent, feathered sentinels of the morning. In this little pocket of forest, time holds its breath. The clamor of castle life is distant. The worries of the world are faint as fog. Here, in the company of wings and wind, of shadow and sun, the day finds its most peaceful beginning. And perhaps, if one listens closely to the soft click of needle through leather, to the wind through the trees, to the bell at the falcon's ankle, one might hear not noise, but the music of a forgotten world. A world built not on spectacle alone, but on quiet ritual, on trust, on care, on the rhythm of life lived gently, one feather at a time. The torchlight flickers more softly now, as the hearty roars of the tournament and clamor of feasting fade into a lull of digestion and gentle murmur. The great hall, once alight with spectacle and clash, begins its slow transformation into a quieter place, a chamber, not of sword and shield, but of string and voice. In the far corner of the stone chamber, seated on low stools beside the hearth where embers now glow a dull orange, a small group of minstrels prepares to perform. Their instruments are old but cared for, the wood worn smooth by years of calloused fingers. There is no need for introduction. Everyone knows what comes next, the songs of memory, of court and countryside, of jesters and lords, of lovers parting by moonlight. The hall seems to lean in, ever so slightly, as the first gentle notes begin to echo across its flagstones. A lute carved from yew, its body dulled by the passing of generations, plucks out a soft, winding melody. It is not music meant to dazzle or demand attention, but rather to lull, to soothe. Next, a rebec joins in a bowed string instrument, held at the chest and coaxing notes that waver like mist over a river at dawn. A wooden flute follows, its breathy tones weaving around the others like ivy curling up old castle walls. Then comes the singer, not loud or dramatic, but understated, their voice more like storytelling than singing. Their ballad is one well known in every shire and village, the tale of Lady Eowyn and the Lantern, Maker's son, a story of quiet rebellion and love in secret. It was a song sung to babies in cradles and to lovers on cold nights, and now it finds its way into the ears of nobles and peasants alike, seated side by side at this table of suspended time. In the medieval court, music was more than entertainment. It was a chronicler, a keeper of memory, a subtle teacher wrapped in rhyme. Minstrels were far more than musicians. They were travelers, observers, keepers of secrets. Their songs were shaped by the stories they gathered, and in turn, their songs shaped the world's memory of itself. Some came from courtly households, trained in melody and meter, raised among parchment and practice. Others were of more mysterious origin, wandering players, born on the road, carrying with them the taste of faraway towns, and songs that no scribe had ever written down. Their songs might contain a clever joke, a hidden warning, or a veiled political jab. And yet, sung with a smile and a bow, none could take offense. Tonight, the songs are gentle chosen to suit the hour, to soothe the bellies now full, and the minds dulled by wine. There is one about a falcon who refused to return to its master's glove, preferring the sky to the gauntlet. Another is a round, sung in layers, where each voice joins a beat apart, like ripples in a still pond. The lords and ladies begin to hum along, some even mouthing the words, though quietly, as if to avoid disturbing the peace of the moment. Children, still drowsy from too much honeyed milk and roasted meat, curl beside their parents or slump on benches, their eyes fluttering in the candlelight. Even the squires grow quiet, their endless energy briefly stilled, listening to the tale of the knight who fell asleep for 100 years, dreaming of a time when battles were fought only with riddles. In the corner, an old noblewoman closes her eyes and sways softly to a tune she once danced to. As a girl, her wrinkled hands remembering steps long forgotten by her feet. Music, after all, does not age. It carries all versions of a person within its notes. The child, the youth, the elder, all are present at once in a melody. There is, too, a song for those who have passed. A haunting, wordless tune played on a single bone flute, so old that its carvings are nearly worn smooth. It is said to be the sound of fog on the moors, or of the wind through the trees where the ancestors still whisper. The hall grows still, all heads bowed, not in grief, but in reverence. The dead are not gone in a place where songs remember. As the night deepens, the minstrels continue, each piece gentler than the last. Eventually, they reach for their softest instruments, small harps strung with gut, hand drums that thrum like a heartbeat at rest. The flicker of flames now casts longer shadows, dancing on the faces of those drifting off into sleep. The final song is always the same. It is called The Sleep of the King, a lullaby written long ago for a weary monarch who could only sleep if the entire castle fell silent. Its melody is simple, repetitive, and sweet a promise that all is well. That night watches over all, and that morning will return. No words are sung, just the hush of harmony, and the slow fading of sound into nothing. The minstrels rise one by one, bowing low, not for applause, but in thanks to the audience, to the hall, and to the night itself. Instruments are tucked away, cloaks drawn close, and steps fade down a stone corridor to their chambers. And in the silence that follows, all remains still. The music lingers, not in sound, but in memory, like dew on grass or starlight on water. The minstrels have bowed and taken their leave. The last flutter of harp strings has faded like mist in the air. The great hall, bathed in the soft golden glow of torchlight and low-burning hearths, feels like it is holding its breath an interlude between music and dreams. But before the revelry fades fully into silence, one more ritual remains. One that brings together king and court, knight and squire, noble and servant, under one unspoken agreement that the night shall end with unity and honor and grace. At the far end of the long feasting table, the queen rises slowly from her carved oak throne. Her gown whispers as she stands, embroidered with curling vines and golden threads that shimmer gently under firelight. Her crown, though modest compared to the king's, gleams with quiet dignity its stones set not for spectacle, but for tradition. She moves with measured stillness, like one long accustomed to being watched, and yet never hurried. The queen's role in the tournament is not as loud as the king's declarations or the knight's battle cries, but it is no less essential. Hers is the watchful gaze, the calming hand, the balm to the court's stormier temperaments. She is not a queen of swords, but of silence, patience, and meaning found between words. In her gloved hands she holds a goblet silver, engraved with ivy and crescent moons. It is not merely a cup, but a symbol of something deeper, older, a relic passed from queen to queen for generations. It holds wine, yes, but also memory. The wine glistens darkly, the color of ripe berries crushed beneath summer feet. And in the hush of the hall, her steps echo gently as she begins the slow walk from her seat toward the center of the gathering. The ritual of the toast is not a hurried affair. It is not the clinking of glasses in a noisy tavern, nor a boisterous shout followed by sloshed ale. No, this is a different kind of toast, one born in the folds of ceremony and silence. The queen's path leads her past knights still in half armor, past young pages blinking sleepily, past servants standing still as stone. She offers a faint nod to each, as if acknowledging every role played this evening: the riders who fell, the horses who charged, the hands who brought roasted fowl to flame. When she reaches the center of the hall, she turns, slowly, to face the gathering. Her voice is soft when it comes, not commanding, but clear, like wind through tall grass. There is no grand speech. Only a few phrases, spoken with the cadence of an old rhyme passed down through time. To the courage of those who rode, she begins, her words rising and falling like the breath of the hall itself. To the wisdom of those who watched, to the hands that served and the hearts that cheered, to the turning of the wheel and the stillness of the stars, and to peace, at least for tonight. With that, she raises the goblet, not to her lips, but high above her head. A single solemn moment of stillness follows, as if the entire castle has been paused, like a breath held just before sleep. Then, at last, she drinks. Not deeply, just one small sip, enough to seal the moment. The silence lingers for a heartbeat longer, then gently ripples outward as others lift their own cups, their own bowls and goblets, in quiet unison. There is no clamor, no thunder of voices, only the soft echoing sound of 100 vessels raised in reflection. Each person in the hall takes a sip. Some smile, others close their eyes. A few bow their heads, whispering their own blessings into the rim of the cup. Even the servants are permitted to partake, allowed this rare breaking of boundary, for on this night and in this hour all stand equal in the eyes of ritual. It is an old tradition, said to date back to a forgotten queen who brought peace after years of war. She was known not for her battles, but for the calm she spread with her presence. It was said that when she walked into a room, arguments stilled, and even crying babes grew quiet. Her toast, simple as it was, came to be seen as a spell of protection words that warded off the return of chaos. And so, it was passed down, queen to queen, never changed. The wine itself is not just any drink. It is spiced, slow brewed, aged in oak casks, sealed with wax and prayer, infused with herbs: lavender for calm, rosemary for memory, and a touch of honey to remind all that sweetness endures. It is not intoxicating but grounding. A sip is enough to warm the chest and slow the breath. It is less a drink than a sigh made physical. After the final toast, the queen returns to her place. She does not speak again, nor does she need to. Her role is complete. What remains now is simply rest. The goblet is placed back upon a cloth of deep green velvet, folded with care. An attendant, an older woman with silver hair and a gait that speaks of decades in the palace, takes it reverently and carries it back to its resting place in the royal reliquary. There it will remain, untouched until the next tournament, the next gathering, the next turning of the wheel. Around the hall, candles are being extinguished now, not all at once, but slowly, one by one. It is not darkness that falls, but dimness, a slow, gentle shading of the world. The torches gutter, casting long shadows that stretch and soften. The guests begin to rise, not hurriedly, but with the slow movements of those already half asleep. Robes are gathered, cloaks drawn close, children lifted into arms. The great doors to the guest chambers are opened by silent guards, revealing long corridors lined with tapestries and polished stone. Outside, the moon has risen higher. It casts its silver gaze upon the castle towers, the ramparts, the now quiet stables. The air is cool and carries the faintest hint of pine. Somewhere, a single owl calls once and then falls silent again. And within the castle walls, peace has settled. The kind of peace that comes not from silence alone, but from shared moments, from old rituals kept, from knowing that for at least one evening, the world was whole. The queen, now seated again beside the king, folds her hands in her lap and gazes out over the room. She does not smile, but her expression is content, composed, as if she too is drifting into a reverie of her own. The feasting is finished, the music has faded, the echo of the queen's toast still lingers like a thin trace of incense, trailing behind those who shuffle quietly away from the hall. The great chamber, once bursting with cheers, clinking goblets, and the stomp of armored feet, has grown still. Chairs have been pushed back gently, the long tables cleared, bit, by quiet hands. The great hearth now burns low, embers sighing, their orange glow casting sleepy shapes along the stone walls. It is nighttime in the castle now, but the castle does not fall into darkness, not fully. For as the sun departs, something softer takes its place. A hush and a warm flicker. 1,000 little flames cradle the halls, not loud, but comforting. Candles placed on ledges, lanterns swinging gently from iron hooks, braziers glowing with coals tended by careful, calloused hands. You can walk through this castle at night if you like. The air is cool, the kind that settles into cloaks and collarbones, not bitter but sharp enough to remind you it's night. You feel it in the breeze that sometimes curls in through high-arched windows left open, the scent of cedarwood smoke and dew-laced ivy drifting in with it. Your footsteps fall softly, muffled by rushes and woven rugs placed in narrow corridors. The stone walls, lit golden by lanterns, curve and climb in elegant, deliberate ways. This castle was not built in haste. It was shaped by generations. Each arch and stair speaks of patience. Each creaking wooden door tells its own tale. You pass by a lattice-covered window. The moon outside is high and full, floating in a velvet sky that has scattered stars across it like spilled salt. The gardens beyond are a silver dream, neatly kept hedges now shadows, and lily ponds still and black as polished glass. Somewhere in the distance, a fox yips once, then silence again. A corridor curves gently to the left. Here, the stones beneath your feet are slightly uneven, as if they remember centuries of footsteps. A line of lanterns glows along the wall, their light not flickering wildly, but pulsing in a slow rhythm as if breathing. The castle is breathing too, not alive in the way people are, but living nonetheless. A place that remembers, that absorbs laughter and prayer, the scrape of boots and the rustle of cloaks, and holds them all gently, like secrets wrapped in cloth. Down one hallway, you hear the soft pad of slippers on stone. A maid, likely, or a kitchen boy sent to fetch something forgotten. Their steps are not rushed. No one hurries at this hour. Even the smallest tasks are done with a kind of reverence, as if the castle's night does not like to be disturbed by clamor. You pass by doorways left slightly ajar. Within, you might glimpse the soft silhouette of a sleeping page, a cloak draped over their shoulders, their head slumped onto a straw-stuffed pillow, or a flicker of candlelight revealing a knight still half-dressed, lost in thought beside a window, polishing a bracer not out of duty but out of habit, lost in the silence. A servant crosses your path. An older man, hunched slightly with age, holding a lantern in one hand and a small pouch in the other. He nods to you politely, more out of custom than surprise. In this castle, everyone has their own reasons for walking at night. Some carry water to chambers, some carry prayers to chapels, some carry dreams, and then there are the watchers. High above, in the towers, guards walk the ramparts slowly, wrapped in cloaks against the chill. They do not speak, for there is nothing pressing to say. They simply observe. They look to the horizon, to the still fields beyond the castle walls, to the flicker of other hamlets' fires in the distance. A dog barks far off. An owl dives silently, wings slicing the wind. Inside, you wander still. There is a quiet alcove here, beneath an old tapestry. You pause beside it. The tapestry shows a hunt nobleman on horseback chasing a stag through a golden forest. But in the low light, it looks almost like a dream. The figures blur into one another. The horses stretch on forever. The stag seems less afraid and more ethereal, like it was never meant to be caught. You wonder how long this piece has hung here. Perhaps it was woven by someone long forgotten, hands now dust, their careful stitches still intact after centuries. Down another hallway, a door opens and closes softly. From within, you hear the gentle pluck of a lute, not a song for performance, but a melody played only for oneself. The notes drift out like mist, hesitant and slow, disappearing almost as soon as they arrive. You don't stop to listen, you simply pass, and let the sound become part of your path. The castle kitchens are quiet now, save for a few lingering embers in the bread ovens. A pot of broth simmers low, kept warm in case someone needs it in the night. A tabby cat sleeps curled atop a barrel, twitching now and then, as it dreams. Perhaps of mice, perhaps of sunlit gardens. A single candle burns on the prep table, melting slowly into a shallow dish of clay. In a small chapel tucked behind the main hall, a priest kneels before a simple altar. He does not speak aloud. His hands are folded, his eyes closed. A single stained glass window above glows faintly blue in the moonlight, casting soft shapes onto the stone floor. The silence here is different, not empty, but full, as if something ancient is listening. You ascend a narrow spiral staircase now. The stone is cold beneath your fingers as you hold the rail. The climb is slow, winding, and each turn reveals another step, another flickering torch. You do not rush. There is no reason to. Time bends differently at night, as though the hours are wrapped in wool and stitched into dreams. At the top, you emerge into the observatory tower. Here, the wind touches your face, and the night stretches out in all directions. The sky seems impossibly wide. You can see the village far below, the little dots of candlelight in windows. You can hear the faint creak of ropes on ships in the harbor, or the rustle of trees in the orchards. The castle, from here, feels like part of the land itself, not separate, but rooted. A brazier burns quietly in the center of the room. Its heat is subtle, just enough to keep the chill at bay. There is a chair beside it, carved from dark wood, its cushion faded from use. Someone has placed a book there, a leather-bound volume with pages yellowed by time. You may sit if you wish. Turn a page. But even if you don't read, the presence of the book feels comforting, as if knowledge itself has come to sit beside you. The stars wheel overhead. Slowly, patiently, they do not blink or race. They move with the kind of rhythm only time can hear. You breathe in, you breathe out, and the air tastes of dust and stone and lavender. Eventually, you descend again. Your feet know the way, even if your mind has begun to soften at the edges. You pass the same window with its latticed moonlight, the same tapestry with the dreaming stag. You hear the lute no more, its song has ended, or perhaps you have simply slipped past its reach. Back to your chamber now. The door creaks open gently. Inside, a fire has been set low in the hearth, its warmth waiting for you. The bed is broad, the sheets clean, the coverlet heavy with embroidered threads. A goblet of water sits on the table, a sprig of rosemary floating within it. The shutters have been drawn, but not fully, just enough to let in the silver breath of night.